Nothing about what we're going to look at in the Bible next is going to make any sense without me telling you about Transformers the movie. And I do not mean the stupid Michael Bay movie with giant clumps of indiscriminate metal banging against each other in ways that are confusing and impossible to sort through. I'm in the animated Transformers the movie that had Leonard Nimoy and Robert Stack and the real voice of Optimus Prime. What's that guy's name? Peter Cullen? I think that's right. No, maybe that's one of the vampires from Twilight. I don't remember for sure, but it had an amazing soaring 80s anthem soundtrack. The Stan Bush is the guy who did that. I still like those songs. And I was so pumped to see this in theaters because my second dad is the leader of the Autobots. It's Optimus Prime, and he's wise, and he's caring, and he's strong, and he always knows what to do, and he gives great advice, and he cares for the little tiny miniature adorable good guy Transformers, the Autobots, like Bumblebee and stuff. And that's kind of who I related to. And so it was just fun to see Prime kick butt. Except then, some Autobot I've never even heard of, Hot Rod, jumps in and interferes in a fight, and the bad guy, Megatron, kills Optimus Prime. Like, straight up kills Optimus Prime. And it was gut-wrenching for me. He turned all gray and his head turns to the side, and I openly wept in the theater. And the movie goes along, and now the Autobots, the good guys, they're rudderless. They have no leadership. They're hanging on by a thread. And we get to the end, and Hot Rod, the guy who ruined everything, has this redemptive moment. And he matures into the new leader of the Autobots, but who's right there in spirit with him? It's Optimus Prime affirming Hot Rod as the new leader, and Prime's voice is right there, and it's like the new version of Hot Rod is speaking with the authority of Prime, and you know everything is going to be okay and come back together. And likewise, in Matthew chapter 10, Jesus is giving this horrifying commissioning speech to his disciples about how they're going to go out. It sounds like Jesus isn't going to be with them. It sounds like they're going to be in incredibly difficult situations in front of very powerful people. And they're going to have to say stuff and figure out what to do and how to defend themselves, or more so, how to articulate the kingdom, even under that kind of duress. And I imagine that in that moment that they're hearing this description, the disciples are feeling like the Autobots did without Prime, rudderless, afraid, leaderless. How is this going to work out? Everything funnels through you, Jesus. This doesn't seem like a great plan. But then in verse 19, after all the scary stuff, Jesus says, but when they arrest you, don't worry about what to say or how to say it. At that time, you'll be given what to say. For it won't be you speaking, but the Spirit of your Father speaking through you. And so it seems like the idea is that in the same way every single kid in that theater in 1985 could rest easy when they heard the voice of Optimus Prime and be like, there's authority, there's power, there is control, there is stability, there's a plan here. Likewise, the disciples would be able to rest easy even facing what is for a lot of people their worst nightmare, speaking in front of people without a script. They could rest easy in that, knowing that, well, whatever this means, the Spirit of your Father will be speaking through you. And let's dive into that a little bit. We all know that the Holy Spirit is one of the three parts of the Trinity, according to historical Christian orthodoxy, and I think that's very evident from the Bible itself. I mean, from the very beginning, we get this Trinitarian language as the Godhead is making things, and there's us and we language amongst them, even as creation is occurring. All three members of the Trinity show up at the baptism of Jesus in, what is that? It's chapter 3, right? That we've talked about at length. And in addition to those overt affirmations of the notion of the Trinity, we also see all three persons of the Godhead at different points in the Bible being affirmed as God and having things attributed to them that could only be attributed to God. And while the Holy Spirit is around and doing stuff and participating in all of these things prior to Acts chapter 2, we really see the Holy Spirit take center stage after that point in the book of Acts. And of course, Acts chapter 2 is where all the disciples are now all of a sudden dealing with exactly what Jesus is describing in Matthew chapter 10. They're like, okay, Jesus is gone. He died. He was resurrected. He hung out with us for 40 days and we ate and we hung out and we learned about things. But then the book of Acts opens, and Acts is, of course, the sequel to the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The book of Acts opens with Jesus still on screen, but then he ascends to the right hand of the Father right after commissioning the disciples one last time to say, be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, to the ends of the earth. And now the disciples are just milling around. They're like, it's really hard. This is freaky. But in the back of their minds in Acts chapter 2, they had to have remembered that Jesus said that's exactly what was coming, that he characterized in this missional discourse of Matthew chapter 10, a moment where it wouldn't be a trial run, it wouldn't be their first open world quest, but a moment where they would be in a much more perilous quest. Now they're hearkening back to this moment. They're like, well, here we are. What are we supposed to do? Well, remember, Jesus said that we wouldn't even have to come up with the words, that it would be the Spirit of your Father speaking through you. And very shortly after that, they have this crazy incident in Jerusalem that, I don't know, I guess I could read you the whole thing, but it's kind of a lot, where they're just hanging out on the day of Pentecost, and they were all together in one place in Acts 2:2. And then suddenly the sound like a blowing violent wind came from heaven and filled the whole house where they were sitting. They saw what seemed to be tongues of fire that separated and came to rest on each of them. I know this is difficult to know what to do with. It's strange. All of them were filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other tongues as the Spirit enabled them. And as crazy as that does and ought to sound to you and me, I have to think that in the moment, given all these guys had seen, that they did remember back to Matthew chapter 10. And they thought to themselves, well, Jesus disclosed, he turned over his cards, we knew this was coming, and now we're saying words that we theoretically shouldn't even be able to say in languages we don't even really totally understand. And, well, that would be exactly in keeping with what Jesus said. Not like, well, don't worry about what to say, just get up there and freestyle it. I mean, this first miracle of this nature is way beyond, I was really nervous, but, I had this speech written, but I'm just going to speak from the heart and we'll see what happens. No, it's not like that at all. They're completely beyond the realm of what they could manufacture or just fake or just wing because they're speaking in languages they don't know. Literally every word they're saying is from this Spirit of their Father speaking through them. I think what Jesus is doing here is introducing the idea of the Holy Spirit in a way that contextualizes him as part of the Trinity so that the disciples understand that, hey, when this thing happens, this is not some spirit of confusion. This is not a spirit from some other supernatural power source. This Spirit of the Father, this Holy Spirit, is God working through you. Maybe at this point in Matthew chapter 10, you're catching this too. Maybe I'm reading into it, but what I'm seeing here is this really fascinating ebb and flow, in and out. This is going to be really difficult, but I've got your back. This is going to be really scary, but I'm with you. This is going to be very difficult, and you might even deal with some very difficult things, but here's how to handle your business. You might get flogged, and you're going to be in front of very difficult, powerful people who could do horrible things to your body, but God is literally with you. His voice, the voice of the Spirit of the Father, literally speaking through you. There's this constant, it's going to be bad, but I've got this thing. It's really scary, but it's totally worth it. You're going where the wild things are, but that's where you want to be. It's dangerous to go alone, but take this. And even though we're still in the part of Matthew chapter 10 that feels like it is mostly targeted to the disciples and their specific situation in the moment and in the medium range future, we're starting to see these patterns and these principles of what life as an ambassador of the kingdom might look like and how that life of the ambassador of the kingdom is going to be fueled for people who aren't the disciples and people who are going to be generation 2 of Christianity, generation 3, generation whatever you and me are. In the same way that kid me sitting in that theater in 1985 or whatever it is, experienced for the first time the death of a beloved character on screen, was an experience that both gave me a reality check about how the world is, but also comfort in that they gave me the joy of hearing the voice of Optimus Prime and seeing everybody else who is scattered and struggling and leaderless come back together under his voice and his guidance. So even much more so, we're getting that here in Matthew chapter 10 with Jesus fully disclosing everything these guys are going to face, but all of that happening in the context of the care and the provision and the presence and the leadership, even if it's going to look a little bit differently, of God himself. Somewhere along the line, a whole bunch of you decided that you were going to support the program and make this thing go by going to patreon.com/the TMBH podcast and just signing up, making a little account and kicking in $1 or $2 per episode. That's why we get to do this. So I'm really thankful to you. I am also really thankful to all of you who do not support the podcast. You don't have to. It's free. I'm super glad you're here. There's no bonus thing or content that I give away. I just want everybody to be a part of it. The Patreon thing is really just an act of goodwill, and that's it. So Thank you, those of you who are able to do that. Thank you, those of you who don't do that. Either way, I love that we get to talk about this stuff together, and I can't wait to do it again tomorrow. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour. Let's do this again soon.